Hey, it's Mark here, and welcome to the next edition of the Employee Survival Guide, where I tell you, as always, what your employer does definitely not want you to know about, and a lot more.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into this workplace harassment case, EEOC v. SkyWest Airlines. You sent us a bunch of legal documents about it, and I think what you want are the key takeaways from it, right? But without all the legal jargon.
Absolutely, yeah. We've got the initial complaint, SkyWest's answer. There's a really important court order in here, and then the jury's verdict, too. It's quite the story.
Okay, cool. So where should we start? I guess with the complaint itself, right? What exactly did the EEOC say happened here?
Yeah, so the EEOC, on behalf of Sarah Budd, is saying that SkyWest allowed a hostile work environment to exist, based on her sex. So, like, crude comments, jokes, they even talk about gestures that simulated assault. It's pretty awful.
Simulating assault. Wow, that's really serious. Were there any specific examples mentioned in the complaint?
Oh, tons of them, yeah. The complaint alleges comments about her body, her coworkers speculating about her sexual preferences, and even other colleagues making light of rape and even glorifying sexual violence. It's really disturbing.
That's terrible. That's so much worse than just locker room talk or, a few off-color jokes.
Yeah, I mean, this is way beyond that. And it's important to note, too, that the EEOC isn't just focusing on, a few isolated incidents. They're saying the harassment was just so widespread that it created this constant, just hostile atmosphere.
Okay, so that's what the EEOC is saying. What did SkyWest say in response to all of this?
Well, they filed what's called an answer to the complaint, and in it, they deny many of these allegations. Or in some cases, they say they don't have enough information to, confirm or deny. So, for example, they admit that Budd reported feeling uncomfortable at times because of, banter between some of her colleagues, but they deny that the harassment was as extensive as she described it.
So not a complete denial, but it sounds like they're trying to, downplay it. Is that a typical legal strategy in cases like this?
Yeah, it's pretty common. Admit what you can't really refute, but try to minimize the rest. And it gets even more interesting when you look at how SkyWest tried to get the whole case dismissed before it even went to trial.
Really? How'd they try to do that?
So they filed something called a motion for summary judgment. Essentially, they're asking the judge to just throw out the case without a full trial. Their argument being that they, took prompt and appropriate action after Budd complained.
So did it work?
Not completely, no. The judge did acknowledge that SkyWest took some action after Budd complained. But, and this is where it gets really interesting, he ultimately decided there was enough evidence to justify a full trial with a jury. He didn't seem convinced that SkyWest's response was, prompt enough or sufficient to actually stop the harassment from happening.
So this is where it goes from just, legal paperwork to an actual courtroom battle.
Exactly. And the jury's verdict is going to show us, just how persuasive each side was in presenting their case.
Okay, so before we get into all that drama, I want to back up a little and make sure I understand why the judge decided this case needed to go in front of a jury. What specifically in SkyWest's response did he find problematic?
That's a great question. And the judge's order denying summary judgment, it's actually quite detailed. To understand his reasoning, we need to look at two main issues. First, did SkyWest know, or should they have known, about the harassment? And second, did they respond quickly and effectively enough to stop it?
Okay, so let's unpack those one by one. First, that knowledge issue. What did the judge look at to figure out, if SkyWest knew what was going on?
So he pointed to Budd's initial complaint that she made to her supervisor back in September 2019. And then there were more formal complaints she filed, later that year. This suggests that SkyWest was alerted to the issue but didn't do enough about it.
So she didn't just, suffer in silence. She actively tried to report the harassment.
Right. And these reports became a central part of the judge's reasoning. He felt there was enough evidence to suggest SkyWest was aware of the issue, but their response, or lack of a response, was a problem.
So even if they argue later that they didn't know how bad it really was, the judge felt like their initial response, or like you said, lack thereof, was problematic enough to warrant a closer look by a jury.
Yeah, exactly. And remember that legal standard we touched on earlier, reasonably calculated to end the harassment? The judge just wasn't convinced that SkyWest's actions met that standard.
Right. Reasonably calculated. We mentioned that before, but can you just, remind me what it means in this case?
Sure. Basically, it means the employer's response has to be, proportionate and effective. So it's not enough to just give someone a warning or have like some generic anti-harassment policy. The response has to show that they are really serious about stopping it and that it's not going to happen again.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture. So the judge felt that SkyWest's response, even if they meant well, might not have been strong enough to actually meet that reasonably calculated standard.
Right.
And that's ultimately why he sent this case to a jury.
That's exactly right. And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore what the jury decided.
All right, so the judge wasn't convinced and sends it off to trial. What happened next?
Well, that's where things really heat up. The trial. The jury, remember, has to figure out two main things. Did SkyWest create a hostile work environment for Bud because she's a woman? And the second part, did they retaliate against her for, speaking out about the harassment?
Right. Those were the two main claims in the case. So let's take the hostile work environment claim first. What did the EEOC do? Like, how did they try to convince the jury that SkyWest was liable?
They really focused on painting this really vivid picture of what Bud went through. They showed all that evidence of those crude comments, the jokes, all the stuff that created that hostile environment. And all those, remember, those comments and gestures that simulated assault, they really emphasized that, saying that it goes way beyond, what's acceptable at work.
So they wanted the jury to, really get how bad and how constant the harassment was.
Exactly. It wasn't just a couple of things. It was a whole pattern of behavior that made her work life miserable. And they had Bud testify, too. She got to speak directly to the jury and tell them about the emotional distress, how it impacted her.
Yeah, putting a, human face on those legal arguments, that can be really powerful for a jury.
What did SkyWest do, though? How did they defend themselves?
Oh, they fought back, definitely. Their lawyers acknowledged, all right, maybe some inappropriate stuff happened, but they were adamant that they took action immediately and decisively once they knew what was really going on.
So basically admitting to something but trying to minimize it. Pretty much, yeah. They made a big deal about putting Bud on paid leave right after she filed that formal complaint. So that shows how committed they were to protecting her, while they investigated.
Putting her on leave does seem like, they were at least concerned about her. Did the jury buy it?
Well, remember, the verdict was mixed, right? So they sided with Bud and the EEOC on that hostile work environment claim, but they didn't find in favor of Bud on the retaliation.
Wait, hold on. Remind me what the retaliation claim was again.
Oh, sure. Bud's lawyers argued that SkyWest retaliated against her, because she spoke up about the harassment. So they pointed to her being on indefinite leave for months, no clear date for coming back, and said SkyWest was basically trying to get rid of her.
So even if SkyWest did something, they're saying it wasn't enough to make her feel safe coming back to work.
Exactly. They basically said SkyWest created this impossible situation that forced her to take early retirement.
That's a pretty serious accusation. How did SkyWest respond to that?
Their lawyer said, no. Her decision to retire was her own, totally unrelated to what was going on with the harassment. They pointed out that there was a good early retirement package available and that she had mentioned wanting to work part-time before all this happened.
So trying to, separate her decision to retire from the hostile work environment, make it look like just a coincidence.
Exactly. And on that point, the jury agreed with SkyWest.
Wow, that split verdict is really interesting. Okay, before we go into all that, can we go back to the judge's decision to deny the summary judgment? You mentioned the order was pretty detailed. I'm curious, what did he find so problematic about SkyWest's response that it warranted a trial?
You're right, it was a very thorough order. And it helps us see why he sent it to trial. Remember, SkyWest said, look, we acted right away and we were effective, but the judge didn't buy it. Two things really bothered him. The timing of their response and, just how thorough their investigation was.
Okay, let's take those one at a time. First, the timing. What stood out to him?
3 months. That's how long it took from Bud's first complaint to her supervisor to when SkyWest actually started a formal investigation. So remember, she first brought it up in September 2019, but the investigation didn't start till December after she filed those more formal complaints.
3 months is a pretty long time, especially if it was as bad as they say. Did he say why he thought that was a problem?
He kind of implied that SkyWest at first were more dismissive than proactive. Like maybe they didn't meet that legal obligation to address harassment claims right away. He pointed out that during those 3 months, the harassment continued and SkyWest didn't do anything until she, went further with the complaints.
So it sounds like he was worried that they weren't taking her initial complaint seriously enough, and that's why it was allowed to go on.
Yeah, and remember that reasonably calculated thing. A 3-month delay just didn't show that sense of urgency, that commitment, to really stop the harassment.
Got it. Okay, so timing was one issue. What about the investigation itself? What did he think was wrong with that?
A couple things. First, they didn't interview everyone Bud named in her complaints, so maybe they weren't as thorough as they could have been in getting all the information.
So maybe missed some key details, different viewpoints, by not talking to everyone.
Right, exactly. And remember, SkyWest said they did discipline some employees, but the judge pointed out that the details of that discipline weren't clear from the evidence. So was it enough? Was it proportionate to what they did?
So even if they did something, maybe it wasn't enough to really fix the problem and make sure it didn't happen again.
Yeah, good way to put it. He felt SkyWest needed to do more, show they were serious about a harassment-free workplace. And so that, plus the delay in the first place, that's why it went to trial.
All right, so we've got the judge's decision, the trial, that split verdict. But what did it all mean for Sarah Budd? I mean, did she get anything out of this?
Yeah, good question. Remember, the jury said SkyWest was liable, all right, for the hostile work environment. So now they had to decide what Budd should get, as compensation for what she went through.
Right, damages. So what did the jury decide? What'd she get?
A pretty good amount, actually. She was awarded a total of $300,000.
Whoa, okay.
Yeah, and they broke it down. So $170,000 of that was for something called compensatory damages, and the other $130,000 was for punitive damages.
Okay, so what are compensatory damages? I mean, what that's supposed to cover?
Well, it's meant to, compensate the victim for the actual harm they suffered because of what happened, the illegal actions, So for Budd, that $170,000 probably includes things like her emotional distress, maybe any therapy costs, damage to her reputation, stuff like that.
So it's not about, punishing SkyWest. It's about trying to make things right for her as much as money can.
Exactly, yeah. It's acknowledging that she was really hurt by that environment SkyWest created.
Okay, that makes sense. What about those punitive damages, that extra $130,000? What's that for?
That's different. It's not about compensating the victim. It's about actually punishing the defendant for acting so badly.
So the jury basically thought that SkyWest was so bad they deserved an extra penalty on top of paying her for her suffering,
Yeah, pretty much. And it sends a message to SkyWest and other employers that this is serious, This stuff won't be tolerated. Punitive damages are supposed to make them think twice next time.
I'm a little confused, though. Didn't the jury say that SkyWest wasn't responsible for her resigning? So how did they decide on these damages if they didn't think SkyWest caused her to quit?
Good point. Yeah, those compensatory damages, they're specifically for the harm from that hostile environment.
So even though she didn't get money for lost wages or, future earnings because they didn't think she was forced out, she's still entitled to be compensated for all the distress she went through, all that harassment.
Exactly. They saw that she was really hurt by all of it, even if it didn't directly lead to her leaving. It's important for anyone listening, if you're in a similar situation.
You mean even if you haven't been fired or forced out, you can still do something, take legal action if you're dealing with a hostile work environment?
Absolutely. The law is there to protect people from harassment, whether or not they lose their jobs. Document everything, report it the right way, talk to a lawyer if you need to.
Wow. This deep dive into EEOC v. SkyWest Airlines has been really fascinating. We started with that initial complaint, then SkyWest's response, the judge's decisions, all the way to that jury's verdict and the damages they awarded.
Yeah, a lot of legal stuff, but hopefully we explained it in a way that makes sense, even if you're not a lawyer.
Definitely. And I think it just shows how important it is to take this stuff seriously, both for employers and employees. Everyone needs to work together to build a safe and respectful workplace for everyone.
Absolutely. Well said. And to our listener out there, we hope you found this deep dive helpful. Remember, knowledge is power, so stay informed, stay curious, and keep learning.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive, everyone. We'll see you next time.
If you like the Employee Survival Guide, I'd really encourage you to leave a review. We try really hard to produce information to you that's informative, that's timely, that you can actually use and solve problems on your own and at your employment. So if you like to leave a review anywhere you listen to our podcast, please do so. And leave 5 stars, because anything less than 5 is really not as good, right? I'll keep it up. I'll keep the standards up. I'll keep the information flowing at you. If you'd like to send me an email and ask me a question, I'll actually review it and post it on there. You can send it to mcarui@capclaw.com. That's capclaw.com.